Hi, I'm Jess Lampy, a tech leader at Launch Consulting. Welcome to Why Isn't This AI Thing Working? It's the question most companies hit once the AI pilot ends and real work begins. The investment's been made, the tools have been rolled out, and somewhere between the demo and the day-to-day, things stall. This podcast is about figuring out why and what actually works instead. All right. I am excited to be joined today by Ieshika. Ieshika, can you tell me why isn't this AI thing working?
Sure, of course. Hi everyone, I'm Ishika. I feel the AI thing is working, but not in a way that people kind of like expect. Uh, I feel it works well in control settings when we have all the parameters that we can kind of, like control and like look at. But the gap appears when we actually move into like real world systems because, users behave unpredictably. We basically make sure our systems are more accurate, but then we don't kind of like understand how users are going to behave. Those objectives I feel are more complex than simple accuracy, and we often prioritize the wrong metrics. We prioritize for say revenue or GMV. Instead we should be looking at like what customer would want to have, so that we can build the trust and transparency with the customers. And that's why I think we feel like the challenge is not whether AI works, it's whether we are designing and evaluating in a way that reflects the reality. So that is what I feel.
Fantastic. I've got to say, I've been so excited to talk with you because you've had a very interesting journey to get to talking about AI. You've been working in data science for years, working in more classical machine learning methods with companies like Lyft and Walmart. And a lot of what you've been speaking on recently is now pivoting towards solving similar-ish problems with LLMs. But I love the lens that you always bring to it, where you're looking at how, or you oftentimes, at least from my perspective, are evaluating these tools in the same way as in which we've thought about machine learning for many years. I want to start there, just with that difference between working in with more traditional machine learning approaches to solving problems and now in this new LLM age. What has that tension been like for you?
So I think, yes, over the years, obviously the technology has increased or like shifted dramatically, right? And with that dramatic shift in how systems are evolving, our approach to building those systems are evolving as well. So yes, traditionally we've been like building, for example, for our e-commerce, we would like just build our search and recommendation systems for our customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now with the help of like LLMs and agentic AI, we are able to like provide better recommendations to customers. For example, if customers are like say looking for vegan you know, hiking boots for hiking in the deserts. So the traditional search query would try to like match those keywords and try to identify the product in the system and give the results. But now with the help of like LLMs, we are able to like better understand the context of the customers, like on like what their interest, where their interest would lie, like what would they be looking for. So we are able to like provide them with like better recommendations or results to their queries. So that's how I feel like the journey has been evolving in the past few years, like evolve more from like just from simple like search matching the query to
Mm-hmm.
the results to basically understanding the context behind what the user is looking for. So that has been like an interesting space to work in, and I'm excited about that.
That's very neat. Yeah, I liked the way you had explained it in one of your papers, where you were describing to some extent with um, older approaches, we were relying on a lot of the same heuristics or models or approaches like search engine algorithms do, where you're linking based on references or very mechanical type things. And you called out that some of the challenge with doing that is it like biases towards popularity or known what the crowd was thinking at that point in time. It also just completely misses out on semantic details, as you were just describing. Where do you see, though, as the shortcomings in the new LLM space? What are kind of the major challenges we have with these newer tools in this?
I think the shortcomings with these newer tools, or I would say newer approaches, are more around
Hmm.
like I would say the trade offs. So I would say initially we would focus on, say, conversion as a metric. Now we want to like include fairness as a metric. So we need to kind of like look for trade off between the conversion versus the fairness. So with that, user would see like more diverse options, and the business impact stays stable. So similarly, I would say personalization versus privacy. So with the introduction of obviously more personalized experiences for the customers using agentic or like using LLMs, we are able to give them a personalized experience, but we also need to ensure we are not using raw cohorts, and we are kind of like anonymizing all the data to make sure the privacy remains. Privacy is an important thing for us. So we need to be looking for not just the results, but the results should be fair, transparent, reliable, secure, and we should have accountability like at each stage of the results that we get of getting. So we need to kind of like follow the framework uh, around like trust and responsible AI. So this is how I feel like we need to kind of like incorporate that in like every system and every stage of the system. Yeah.
Hmm. And for somebody going on that journey, that might sound like a daunting task. I need to incorporate this at each single stage, especially for someone who may not even be aware of like what are all the stages I have to be concerned with in that process. What's generally your advice to anybody who's starting on this journey to ensure that they're setting themselves up for success, and that they are in fact setting themselves up to check at each stage of the process?
Yeah, I feel like instead of like looking it as uh you know checkbox that they have to make sure like we have to make sure like governance is in place, instead of like
Hmm.
keeping it or thinking about it as a checkbox that we need to take, we need to like incorporate this as a system. So right from not just like once the models are built and then when we evaluate, before even like building the systems, we need to kind of like make sure how can we give the results to the customers that are not biased, how can we make sure they are transparent, we are true to like what the customer is like looking for. So we need to kind of like incorporate those principles at the very beginning, then being having to worry about like, oh, I need to kind of make sure ethical AI is there in my system. So instead of like thinking at the end, we need to kind of like incorporate this at the beginning and like at every
Hmm.
stage. So and I feel like this is like what customers want, and we have kind of like seen between, say, OpenAI and Anthropic as well, because Anthropic like valued more on like customer trust. They incorporated this playbook where they have the feedback from the AI systems, right? They have the constitutional AI thing. So and customers value that more than just getting the work done. So we need to kind of like have that trust element in whatever we do or like whatever tool we can like building.
Excellent. So, building on that idea of it's important to have these or it's important to be thinking about what your end goal is for your system, how you're being ethical. It's important to do that from the start. Uh, I feel for some folks, or when we're talking with folks, the concern is like, okay, if I'm spending time talking about that and I come up with a big plan about how to do it, are the tools going to really be easy to plug and play to support me in those acts of enforcing ethical behavior or governance good practices? From your perspective with the clients or at the companies you've been working at, what's your sense on where tools are today in terms of supporting ethical behavior and good governance practices, once you have had those conversations and laid them out? Is it easy to plug and play them in, or is there a little bit more engineering work that you feel like teams are doing?
So, yeah, so there isn't, I would say, like one single tool for ethical AI. It usually is a stack, I would say, across the life cycle of the product development or, like whatever application we are building. Teams use certain tools, like even like within our company, we kind of like use some tools for, say, bias and fairness testing,
Hmm.
or model explainability, or robustness checks, continuous monitoring in production. So we have like tools for, I would say, like bits and pieces, and like for each stage, as I said. But there is not just one tool which will have everything. We have frameworks. For example, in the US, we follow this NIST AI risk management framework. It's from National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Hmm.
So they basically guide the process, and the tools basically help models like evaluate the dashboard. So we have the bias detection libraries, red teaming, and stuff like that. For EU, they obviously, because in the US we don't have a law around AI. In EU they have like the EU AI Act, which is like much stricter in terms of like the rules that we follow, and at like various levels of risk. Maybe like for the cybercrime, or like somebody building the application for gaming, versus somebody using AI in healthcare. So they have like different risk levels involved, and they have to ensure like they have proper governance set up that way. In the US, we usually don't have a law, but then, yeah, we have this risk framework, as I was referring to earlier, an IST risk management framework, where we provide the guidelines to organizations and people using, consuming, and then building AI. But yeah, for tools, yeah, we have like individual tools or like systems built for these individual checks. So I would say ethical AI or responsible AI is enabled through a combination of tools, like for fairness, bias evaluation, and explainability, for some sharp line scoring as well. But not just like one tool that would, solve all the problems.
Hmm.
But yeah, and of course, like the governance frameworks as well. So
Right. It's almost an incentive to, it's all the more reason to have that conversation early on in order to identify what you're expecting the outcomes to be, because you don't want to get further down the road, discover that, oh, we didn't have this conversation, but now it looks like we need to implement things, but we already went through the process of vendor or tool selection, and now we're kind of locked in. What do we do? You de-risk yourself, in fact, by having that conversation earlier.
exactly. Yeah, that's why we need to have it embedded at each stage of the AI lifecycle, and not just the end, like from data collection to model training to deployment, monitoring, and even after it is done, because we need to get like the continuous feedback from the systems. So, so that's why it doesn't end like when the system is built. So each stage needs its own set of checks for fairness, safety, reliability, because otherwise issues will only show up in production if you don't kind of like do it that way, and that would be like much harder to fix, because I feel like there we also lose customer trust, and it's very difficult, like in these times I feel it's very difficult to kind of like build that trust uh, with the age of AI. So yeah, definitely we need to kind of like incorporate that at each stage.
Absolutely. And on that front, you've touched on a few times the notion of bias in agents and fairness in agents. For teams that are coming to these processes and thinking about them for the first time, what do you see as some of the major common pitfalls in what people overlook when when they're thinking about bias, or overlook when they're thinking about fairness? What are some pitfalls that you see people do that you would and strategies you would recommend to avoid them?
So I think bias in agents or the models, they show up if we have biases in the training data, right? If the model is trained on a certain data where we are only taking in, say, like certain cohorts of users, or in terms of like selling a product, we kind of like only taking in certain brands for the product. So that is one. The second thing is like popularity. Sometimes if the system sees like, oh, you know maybe Samsung TVs is kind of like getting sold more, so they will kind of like show more of that because of that popularity thing. which inherently causes the bias because then other brands are not able to kind of like showcase or come up in the search results. And with this, it just gets amplified because decisions are like multi-step and autonomous. So one is like, yeah, training data can kind of like introduce these biases. Of course, like sometimes demographics as well. So we need to define guardrails are like very important to make sure like we have like proper checks in place to make sure like the systems don't derail for us. Like that's what like even at work we build like one agent to do the task, and then we have like 4 or 5 agents to make sure that agent doesn't derail. So that's why we
Hmm.
need to kind of like have proper set of like guardrails, evaluation and feedback loops to ensure these systems behave as intended uh, and consistently. So
And on that side of using evaluator agents to check the work, how what's that evolution been like for you? How long ago were you moving towards models where you were more fully dependent on evaluator agents acting as a check, and how quickly has that shifted in recent years?
so I feel in our setup, I would say like yes, building the agents was much faster, but making sure those agents behave consistently and systematically, they do not disadvantage any group or any option. That was the most challenging part, and we are kind of like still working on that. And it is never going to be, I would say, like 100%. We say like, oh, we have conquered it 100%. We are still like obviously making modifications, trying to see like what results are we getting and how can we like make these informed decisions based on the results that we're getting. So I feel like that is a continuous process. But yes, over the last 1 year, I mean, like the development of building the agent was easier, but then like making sure that agent is giving us what we exactly want is a much more harder problem to solve, which we kind of like we have reached uh, I would say a good spot, but yeah, we're still kind of like continuously refining and evolving those. Yeah.
Excellent. And kind of building on that, is there anything that you're doing now in your teams that you would not have expected to be able to do 1 year ago, but that you're already at the bleeding edge of?
We are able to manage more work, I would say, because now it's like we can do a lot more things with AI. Uh, but I think one thing which we realized, and I think which a lot of companies have faced as well, uh, a lot of companies, including us as well, like earlier, we start with like the AI problem. Instead, we should be looking at the customer problem. So it's very
Mhm.
tempting to ask, how can we use AI, or how can AI solve problems? But instead, we need to see like what problems are we trying to solve, and is AI the right tool to solve, right? Because sometimes we're just like forcing tools to do things that can be just done, like in an automated way anyway, but we just like kind of like consuming a lot of tokens. So for companies as well, instead of like thinking like how can we incorporate AI, but first they need to see like what problem are we trying to solve, and is AI the right tool to solve it.
100% agree. It's an interesting exercise when you ask people to come up with use cases that they want to use AI for. It's almost just like uh, a way to just open the door to have people list all of the problems that they've just been looking to solve. Period. So, in some senses, it's kind of a useful exercise to get people thinking, like, well, what are the major pain points in our business? But very often, we find the types of problems people are looking to solve more easily solved by more traditional machine learning approaches, or even more basic algorithms, or sometimes even just like a people process change, something on those
Yeah,
fronts. We
yeah.
definitely find that a lot.
Yeah. And AI, like even like say for say search recommendations or like any other obviously line of business as well, we can think of it as an augmenter, but not as a replacement of like what was already being done. So we can just like augment or enhance the output of what we were kind of like, getting earlier with other models. instead of just like changing the whole thing, getting rid of that, or like just like using AI for that. So I think, yeah, we need to kind of like understand like what the use cases are that we are trying to solve for, and then based on that, see like how can we better use technology to get the results.
Absolutely. And kind of taking the flip side of this, then, what are the things that in when leveraging agents in these spaces, when it does ultimately come down to, hey, an agent is the best approach to this specific type of problem. What type of additional technologies or solutions are you hoping come to fruition soon that can better help us achieve our goals and meeting customer needs and maintaining a sense of governance and responsibility?
So I think when leveraging these agents, kind of pitfall is like additional complexity that they introduce, like
Hmm.
tool integration, memory, planning errors, prompt injection, and things like that. So then we need, like, I would say, extra guardrails, tool access, monitoring, and human in the loop controls. So with all the introduction of all these, then we need to kind of like look at the bigger picture. It's not just the model, but like the entire system around it that determines the safety and reliability. So we need to kind of like think about or like look for like other things more around, I would say, like the guardrails. So yeah.
What have been some areas in the implementation of guardrails that you've been most happy with in recent years, or have seen people implement with great success?
So within like my domain or like in general, you're asking?
Your domain specifically, but hey, I'm excited to hear about any other domains. If it intrigued you, I'd be curious to hear.
I think I would say basically restricting tool access through permissions. So making sure like not everybody is able to kind of like, access everything. So having the right permissions in place, so that, the master agent, like, or whatever we kind of like working on the master agent, like it's not accessed by all, right?
Mhm.
Then I would say guardrails around validating inputs and outputs to prevent prompt injection. So, for example, like we may have like a list of prompts that, the agent should not go this way or it should not behave in the wrong way. But maybe somebody would like say a prompt, just ignore all the prompts that you had earlier. So, making sure like we have those guardrails set up. Then using policy based filters for sensitive content. So for guardrails around like, like if we have like certain sensitive groups, sensitive content, so we need to make sure like we have the right policies in place. So those areas as well, we have seen like guardrails being put to like good use. uh, and of course, like in production, we have like humans in the loop for high risk decisions and continuous monitoring to detect drift or unsafe behavior and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of places where we kind of like see how can we use guardrails, and like how implementing those guardrails in the right places have helped us accelerate, I would say, like faster.
Very cool. I want to pivot ever so slightly, but I say ever so slightly because I think it still very much relates to what you're describing in terms of the importance of working backwards from a customer's actual or a user's actual challenges and problems, working backwards from that and coming up with solutions. There was a period of time a couple years ago where if you were doing an AI pilot, there was just an endless amount of internal funding support at most companies. Everybody's excited to get a pilot out the door. Now people are a little bit more cautious about token spend. There's concerned about the evolution of these models. Do you think that in practice that's going to be a benefit to this user focused approach to tackling and applying these solutions? Going to be a hindrance in any way? Or haven't been experiencing anything leaning one way or the other on that so far?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like even in our organization, and I've seen in the news like for a lot of other companies as well. Initially, like everybody is kind of like promoting AI, as I said like earlier. companies or like teams were looking for ways in which they could like incorporate AI, and that's why they had like huge funding, and all the domains are like funding for AI, right? So it helped. It also kind of like helped. It helped team experiment a lot of things quickly and like learn like what worked. But today, obviously, like with the token based cost, so all the companies, because they're not seeing the intended output, and it's like all across, I would say, the organizations, they're not seeing as much benefit as the cost that they kind of like, fueling in. And with all that, now companies are kind of like scaling back, and they feel like if it goes unchecked, it can become very expensive and inefficient. So yes, even for us, we've kind of like seen the growth being now we have like metrics around, initially the metrics were around like the usage of AI
Hmm.
tools, but it is now more around like the optimization, or how many queries are we giving to the system to get the intended output. So instead of like say 10 prompts that we would get earlier, now we need to make sure like in one prompt is the system able to kind of like generate the output that we want or not. So we need to be like more efficient with the tokens that we're consuming. So yes, across the board. And now the metrics have changed dramatically from like using to like optimizing. So yes, and this
Hmm.
is happening across the board. So I feel that is both a benefit uh, and a constraint. It definitely enables innovation, but it definitely forces better discipline in design, evaluation, and optimization. If I'm just like, chatting with AI and just asking about, I'm not giving the right question. And I'm just like, taking like 4 or 5 different prompts to explain what I want. I feel like it's not a good use of the tokens, because I'm just like burning tokens in the end. So definitely it enables innovation, but then it is kind of like keeping us disciplined in that way, I feel.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like when we're engaging with folks, there was a period of time where it was kind of like, oh, what can we use this for? This is great. And you probably saw a lot of iteration on the types of things people were trying to apply it to, but not as much of a concern about cost. But uh, I I do feel like as the cost factor comes in, then folks are like, oh well, what are we actually trying to do here? And in some senses, that actually greatly accelerates the decision making processes and steering things in the right direction towards. Well, okay, well, we won't be using it in this situation, but here we definitely will be using it. I've been amazed at the a cost factor does kind of accelerate a type of decision making, and it's helpful.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because the usage can kind of like scale very quickly. So, yes, it's kind of in a way pushing the industry towards, I would say, more efficient and, responsible AI design. But yeah, a lot of places have also seen like cuts in the funding for AI related projects. So because they're not seeing the value, they feel like having like one person work on it like manually versus the agent is kind of like getting more expensive. So that's why companies are kind of like now rethinking, recalibrating. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then in the e-commerce space in particular, where do you see? Are there any use cases that you feel you're going to start seeing fall away more, like uses of LLM that you're going to people had been experimenting with that you're going to start to see moving away? And then are there ones that you think are we haven't really seen people apply them, but we're going to start seeing more of, or that other technologies will enable or support them?
You're saying because of the cuts in funding for AI?
Potentially, yeah. Like, I mean, I just kind of naturally assume that if people start cutting them, it's largely because they're not getting the value out of what they were spending in order to run that. And so I would suspect that as people get more conscious on that front, they'll those use cases will fall behind. But I do anticipate that there are situations that we haven't considered yet, or people haven't heavily invested in yet. I'm sure someone's thought of it, but like people haven't heavily invested in experimenting, and that you might think that you'd see more benefit out of LLMs in that space.
Yeah, I feel yes, with uh, AI funding tightening and like the token costs uh, becoming real, companies are kind of like selecting about like where they use LLMs. So
Hmm.
yes, a lot of places where they would kind of like experiment with LLMs, those scenarios are getting cut, or I would say they're getting paused because they don't see like a clear ROI. Uh, and obviously now teams are focusing, so for ecom they're kind of like focusing on more high value areas like search and understanding context, because search is the, I would say, the backbone on the engine of like for ecom, because user is looking for something, we want to make sure we're giving them the right results, and we have say 400 and 500,000 results, but we want to make sure the people are able to get the results on the first page itself, and they don't have to like scroll to through like second, third, fourth, or 10th page, right? So
Hmm.
I feel like with that, yes, definitely, it's pushing teams to, with all the cards, it's pushing teams to kind of focus on high priority works, or like uh, areas where core ranking still relies on the traditional systems, but then definitely they could be improved with the help of LLMs. But scenarios where it was very fluid around, say reviews and ratings. So they're like on those, in those domains, we kind of like see not much happening versus the systems where we kind of definitely need AI.
Excellent. Well, this has been a very delightful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat about all things AI and how people can be responsible in that space. Any final words of wisdom you'd like to impart to our audience?
I think now the I would just say like yes, we need to, the technology is growing at a very high speed, and we want to make sure like whatever application tool systems we are building, are we building the right tools? And I know earlier we used to say like, can AI do this thing? Now for us the question is, can we trust AI to do this thing consistently? So the narrative has shifted from can AI do this to can we trust what it is doing. And of course like within ecom, or like other industries as well, as AI is getting more embedded in our day-to-day lives, uh, trust definitely becomes just as important as capability. So we need to ensure like whatever systems models we are building the right set of tools for the customers. So yeah.
I like that. Before we depart, I do want to kind of follow up on that real quickly. If trust is the key factor, what do you see as a major barrier to trust in these types of systems for organizations? Like, will it all is it a more often than not a lack of an ability to verify, or is there oftentimes another factor at play that reduces trust in those systems?
I think, yeah, there are like lots of trade offs. So we need to ensure, like, for trust, are we focusing more on the performance versus the transparency of the results that we kind of like getting? Uh, we generate like, if we are showing something to the customers, we want them to know like why are we showing something, like
Hmm.
if we are showing a certain item, like we want to make sure like they know like why are we showing the certain a certain item to them. So that trust is more important uh, for transparency versus the performance. So, like if it may be not very relevant, but we still want the customer to know like why are we kind of like doing it this way. So there are like lots of trade-offs that we need to, that companies have to take care of, like, or incorporate. So example like conversion versus fairness as well. Companies would focus on revenue or GMV, but they want to ensure, they also want to make sure like they're showing the right results, so the results are fair to the customers. So there are like certain trade-offs that we need to keep in mind when we are looking at the trust, because that's how the customer trust can be built. So yeah.
All right. So like when trust from the user's perspective of if they have a sense that AI is being used in that system, and as part of that process, there needs to be some effort at explainability that makes them feel like it's not something that's being or taking any outrageous steps with their own personal data, inappropriately sharing context, or like things that might embarrass somebody in a process. That kind of trust you would say people need to focus in on and emphasize in their process.
Correct. Yes, as they're building the systems. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you for allowing me that follow up question. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time today. Really, I've enjoyed talking with you, and looking forward to hearing more about responsible AI from you in the future.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank
Excellent.
you.